situation for you to report upon?
Well, it is. We're finally seeing now the results of tremendous amount of hard work, time and resources that have gone into promoting Australian wines overseas. And for the first time, in fact, ever, we've sold in excess of 50 million litres in the last 12 months.
One of the staggering things about that figure of 50 million litres to me, though, Ian, is that it still only represents about 1% of what we might get our hands on. It could be really the
8時51分、コーダを出まして南に走ります。ガソリン入れてから約300キロ走っております。昨日が42度で今日も、42度という予想です。今日は南部が曇ってるんですけども、でも暑そうですね。次の町まであと43キロあります。また同じようなワンパターンの道が始まります。
from Washington.
With the number of US and Allied bombing sorties on Iraq now approaching 5,000, the US military today announced it would switch the emphasis of the raids towards Iraqi troop emplacements in Kuwait and southern Iraq. There's now a growing realization here in America that the war could go on for some time, despite the initial wave of euphoria which followed earlier bombing raids. A New York Times poll here today revealed widespread support for President Bush and the war effort. But nonetheless, the anti-war movement is gathering steam, with an estimated 15,000 demonstrating in Washington earlier today. Security is at an all-time high, with New York reporting more than 600 bomb scares since the war began, an average of 200 a day. The government a short time ago announced the call-up of a further 170,000 reserve troops. At the same time, President Bush appears to have succeeded in persuading Israel to stay out of the war, following a decision to airlift the Pentagon's Patriot anti-missile system, complete with American crews, to Israeli soil. Matt Peacock, Washington.
In Israel, there have been further false alarms of air attacks during a tense night. Tony Hill in Nicosia reports the US-led forces are mounting their fourth straight day of air strikes.
US planes were reported taking off from Saudi Arabian airfields several hours ago as the fourth night of the offensive against Iraq got underway. However, the chairman of the US Joint Chiefs of Staff said in Washington that air attacks would begin to focus less on Iraqi military complexes and more on Iraqi troop positions. About 4,000 raids have been launched against Iraqi military facilities since the conflict began. Shifting the attack to troop positions is seen as the next step towards the eventual ground offensive to drive Iraqi forces out of Kuwait. Air raid sirens have sounded again in Israel in the past few hours, but the warning of incoming Iraqi missiles was a false alarm. Tony Hill, Nicosia.
Israel's ambassador in Canberra, Mr. Zvi Kedar, says his country won't be able to absorb the damage from the Scud missile attacks for much longer. Mr. Kedar says the Iraqi attacks have generated anger and outrage in his country and are being viewed in a most severe way by the Israeli government. The Australian government today urged Israel to show as much restraint as possible and said it recognised the pressure the state was under. Iraq is claiming to have downed 142 Allied planes and says more than 90 of its people have been killed in bombing raids. An army communique says in the past 2 days alone, 40 civilians, one of them a child, and 31 soldiers have been killed. It says almost 250 people have been injured in the Allied raids since the start of the war. The US and Allied forces say they've lost a total of 10 planes, and they claim to have downed 10 Iraqi planes. Mikhail Gorbachev has asked for all Soviet nationals still in Iraq to be evacuated. TASS news agency quoted him as saying only 100 Soviets were still there. They'd done so of their own free will to wind up business, and none had been hurt. The International Red Cross is gearing up for a massive exodus of refugees from Iraq. It's reactivated camps in Jordan and is conducting an appeal to fund new refugee centres in other countries. The Secretary-General of the Australian Red Cross, Alan McLean, says 2 planes carrying 100 tonnes of medical supplies are leaving for the Iranian capital, Tehran, today.
The International Red Cross is concerned that massive numbers of people, perhaps as many as 1 million, may cross borders in the Middle East, primarily into Jordan, perhaps into Syria and Turkey, even into Iran. The Red Cross is responding in those countries at present.
What are you doing?
In Jordan, refugee camps which were needed back in September last year following the mass exodus of Asian oil workers. These camps have been reactivated, food supplies, shelter, blankets, cooking equipment, in the expectation that tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands may seek shelter in Jordan in coming days.
Australia is coordinating other relief operations in Jordan for the growing number of Gulf War refugees. World Vision's International President Graham Irvine arrives in Lebanon today to start organising extra staff, tents, blankets and medical supplies. Relief groups say there could be 1 million refugees fleeing into Jordan alone. Thousands more are moving into Syria, Turkey and Iran. Although stockpiles will last for about 30 days, World Vision has launched an appeal for funds to cope with the expected flood of refugees as the war intensifies. Donations to Operation Desert Shelter can be made at any ANZ bank. Federal police are being asked to investigate a false campaign telling young Australians they've been conscripted to the Gulf War. Defence Minister Robert Ray has revealed that letters with false Defence Department letterheads Pine Gap Joint Defence Facility near Alice Springs this morning to protest against the Gulf War. They were hoping to challenge American and Australian employees, but the bus that normally brings them to work didn't show up. No police were present, and the few security personnel visible kept a low profile. Meanwhile, there's strong support in Britain for involvement in the Gulf conflict. The latest British opinion polls show 80% of the population say they support the use of force. Kirsty McIver reports the polls are published in the Sunday Times, the Observer newspapers.
4 out of 5 people say they're satisfied with the British government's conduct of the war, and 84% say they believe Prime Minister John Major has a good grasp of the situation. But only 60% said they feel the liberation of Kuwait justifies the loss of British lives. And the Observer poll shows that support for the Conservative government has jumped 2 points. Kirsty McIver, London.
The Soviet Union says the summit between Mikhail Gorbachev and George Bush in February will go ahead as planned. Monica Azar reports the Soviets believe it'll be business as usual despite the crackdown in Lithuania.
The Soviet Foreign Ministry says there are no changes to the planned schedule. The summit will go ahead as planned from February the 11th to the 13th. The White House suggests the summit might be called off because of last weekend's bloody crackdown on Lithuania by the Soviet armed forces. The Soviet Foreign Ministry says, however, that Soviet and American representatives will meet in Washington on Monday to put the finishing touches to a treaty which will cut long-range nuclear arsenals. The treaty will be signed at the summit. Monica Azar, Moscow.
Fears of a resurgence of tuberculosis infection in Australia have sparked calls for a national eradication program. Health reporter Kate Carrigan says Queensland TB expert David Dawson says the government should at least ensure the collection of up-to-date statistics.
The incidence of TB in Australia has dropped from 50 cases per 100,000 to 10 in the early 1980s. But Dr. Dawson from the Queensland Department of Health says the spread of AIDS, which increases susceptibility to TB, and immigration from Southeast Asian countries where TB infection rates are high could see a resurgence of the disease. His comments come in the latest Medical Journal of Australia, which also carries a 1986 New South Wales study on TB infection. Of the 290 cases reported, only 30% were born in Australia. Of the remainder, nearly 50% had been in Australia less than 10 years, and 54 were from Vietnam. The study calls for increased screening of immigrants and follow-up procedures to ensure all cases are detected.
The effects of the war aren't all bad. Wholesale petrol is set to fall in Australia by about half a cent a litre from midnight tomorrow. The chairman of the Prices Surveillance Authority, Professor Alan Fells, says retail prices could soon be under 70 cents a litre. Professor Fells says there are 2 reasons for the 40% fall in crude prices since the war began.
First, the fundamentals of supply are very strong, and secondly, the fear premium that was built into prices has been punctured. The fear that there would be major disruption to oil supplies. Once that fear was removed, the oil price fell very sharply.
Now the main points in our story is from the Gulf. The US air bombardment is switching to troop emplacements. Israel's ambassador to Australia says his country is running out of patience with Iraq. And in the other stories, the aid agencies are expecting a massive number of refugees due to the war. This is ABC National News. It's 10 minutes past 9. Tony Buff in Perth continuing this bulletin. Anti-war protesters are having a day of rest after yesterday's show of strength, but they claim it's only the quiet before the storm. Tens of thousands of people took to the streets in several cities to voice their opposition to the Gulf War. Stephanie Clark reports the targets of protests have been buried.
Unlike the US, where anti-war rallies turned ugly, yesterday's protests in state capitals and regional centres were described by police as orderly and well-behaved. The largest rally was in Sydney, where about 20,000 turned out. In Perth and Melbourne, the traditional minute's silence for victims of war was replaced by a minute of screaming. The US and Australian governments came in for the most flack. A pile of bones was dumped on the United Nations office doorstep.
Meanwhile, children in Perth are meeting to promote a peaceful future to undertake a public information campaign to warn parents about the dangers of some swimming pool skimmer boxes. The Minister for Consumer Affairs, Yvonne Henderson, says about 20,000 pools installed before 1988 are believed to have been fitted with a type of skimmer box which is considered unsafe. Skimmer boxes are located on the waterline of the pool to remove leaves and other debris by sucking water through a filter basket. 3 children have died and 4 have suffered severe injuries after sitting on the boxes. Mrs. Henderson says a pamphlet outlining ways to make the devices safe will be distributed to pool owners by local council inspectors. The West Australian government's decision to allow more service stations to open on Saturday afternoons has been described as dictatorial. The National Party's Consumer Affairs spokesman Max Trenorden says the decision to issue special trading permits to a number of stations on request shows contempt for Parliament. The government decided last week to allow more than twice as many stations to open on Saturday afternoons, despite Parliament's rejection of legislation to extend trading hours across the board. Sport now and first tennis, and Pat Cash is out of this year's Australian Open after losing in 3 sets to world number 1 Sweden's Stefan Edberg. Cash went down 6-7, 5-7, 2-6. Clark Hansen says today's 4th round single match at Flinders Park includes 3 Australians.
And 2 of the Australians will feature on centre court. Todd Woodbridge will be the second match where he will be out to avenge his New South Wales Open thrashing by talented Frenchman Guy Forget. Woodbridge will be followed by Rachel McQuillan, who has a daunting task against the number 4 seed and US Open champion Gabriella Sabatini. The other Australian, Mark Woodford, will join Steffi Graf and Monica Seles on court 1, where he plays Patrick McEnroe.
Cricket. Victoria goes into the second day of its Sheffield Shield match against Western Australia with a useful first day total. After winning the toss at the WACA ground in Perth, Victoria elected to bat and at stumps for 7 for 330 with Berry on 31 and Rifle on 6. The highlight of the day was Lehman's 113, which included 15 fours and 2 sixes. For Western Australia, Bruce Reid took 3 for 64. Boxing, and Dennis Andres retained his World Boxing Council light heavyweight title with a unanimous points decision against Australian challenger Guy Waters at Adelaide's Memorial Drive last night. The power and strength of the English champion was the decisive factor in the fight, but the Mecca on this Sunday morning, and we're off to Perth, Western Australia now to have a chat to Ernie Bridge. Ernie Bridge, the Minister for Water Resources, among a number of portfolios he handles in Western Australia in the government there, is the first Aboriginal Cabinet Minister in the country, and it's a very warm welcome to our program to you on this Sunday morning, Ernie.
Thank you, Neville. Nice really to have the chance to have a chat with you.
I just want to go over a bit of your background before we move on to the major topic of conversation. Born in Halls Creek and a winner, a jockey, winner of the Halls Creek Cup at age 14.
Yeah, that goes back a long time. That's true. I was born in the town of Halls Creek. That was the original old town, as it was referred to for many years. Many years prior. Back and subsequent to the establishment of the old Halls Creek, there was a relocation of the town site, and but the huge and vast electorate. But in more recent years, with the administrative and the sheer workload of being the member for that area, I took the decision that somebody else needs to be responsible for flying aeroplanes. And that my role in an aeroplane was to be a passenger, so we disposed of our aeroplane.
I thought all politics were high flyers, but a high flyer of a different variety now. And I know that on your drawing board you've got an imaginative project. I'm just wondering whether the Kimberley pipeline, which would pipe water across from the Kimberleys down into Perth, some 1,800 kilometres, the cost of which is estimated now to be $8.5 billion. I'm just wondering whether this great passion of yours will ever come to pass because of just the sheer cost of it.
Well, I believe it will, Neville, and even though we talk about a huge cost when we speak in terms of that amount of money, it needs to be understood. It's even less than that now, Neville. That was a figure a little while back, and progressively. And the interesting thing with this project is that each time that we've done a further evaluation and an assessment of it, the costs have come down. Just as one example, when I